Raindrops drummed softly against the hood of the patrol car, sliding down the fogged-up windshield in shimmering trails. The night was cold, and the wet streets reflected the blurred glow of streetlights and neon signs. Officer Silas Montgomery let out a weary sigh as he adjusted the police radio. Another long shift in a city that never slept. He had already finished his coffee, but exhaustion clung to his bones like the damp wind outside. Then, something unusual happened. A faint scratching at the passenger side door. First barely audible, then more insistent. Silas frowned. Maybe just the wind, but then he heard it. A low, pleading whimper. He turned his head and was met with a pair of deep, desperate eyes staring at him through the rain-speckled glass. A dog. The animal was soaked, its fur matted and tangled, but even in such a disheveled state, it was clear that it had once been magnificent. A German shepherd, perhaps slightly older, with time-etched marks around its dark eyes. Its breathing was fast, and its ears, once proud, drooped slightly, a sign of exhaustion. Before Silas could even react, the dog made its move. With a sudden and unexpected leap, it jumped straight into the patrol car through the slightly open door and curled up in the back seat. Silas's eyes widened. What the hell? The dog panted heavily, its paws trembling, but it wasn't aggressive. If anything, it looked determined, as if this car was its last safe haven. The officer rubbed his face, trying to make sense of the situation. Stray dogs weren't uncommon in the city, but there was something different about this one. It wasn't just seeking shelter from the storm, it was running from something. Slowly, Silas reached for the door handle, planning to coax the dog out. But as soon as he pulled it open a crack, the animal pushed its snout against the lock and let out a low, almost fearful growl. It didn't want to leave. A chill crept up Silas's spine. Something wasn't right, and deep down he knew this dog hadn't just stumbled into his car by accident. It was trying to tell him something, and what Silas would soon uncover would shatter his heart. Silas stared at the dog, his pulse steady but his mind racing. The animal didn't move from the back seat. Its deep brown eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. He had seen fear in dogs before. Strays that flinched at the sight of a human. Abused pets cowering from an approaching hand. But this was different. This dog wasn't afraid of him. It was afraid of something else. Carefully, Silas reached out his hand, palm facing up, a gesture of peace. The dog sniffed the air but didn't budge. Instead, it lowered its head and let out a slow, shuddering exhale, as if it had been holding its breath for too long. Up close, Silas could see the scars beneath the damp fur. Small, faded marks along its legs and ribs. His jaw clenched. This dog had been through something. The police radio crackled, breaking the heavy silence. Montgomery, status check. Silas hesitated, then pressed the button on his shoulder radio. 10-4. Just dealing with something. He glanced back at the dog. It hadn't moved. It wasn't running, wasn't barking, just waiting. For what, he couldn't say. Silas sighed and turned off the engine. All right, buddy. If you're staying, we might as well figure out what's going on with you. He pulled out his flashlight and aimed it at the dog's neck, searching for a collar. Nothing. No tags, no identification. Just a thick patch of fur where a collar had once been. He could tell by the faint indentation in the skin. Someone had owned this dog, and someone had removed its collar. But why? The thought gnawed at him. What if this dog belonged to someone who didn't want it anymore? What if it had been abandoned? The idea made his stomach twist. He had seen cases like that before. Pets dumped on the side of the road, left to fend for themselves. But something about this one didn't add up. This dog wasn't lost. It wasn't wandering aimlessly. It had come straight to him. As the rain continued to patter against the roof of the car, Silas made a decision. He reached for his jacket, draped it over the trembling dog, and whispered, "You're safe now." But deep down, he had a feeling this was only the beginning. The storm had eased into a steady drizzle, but the cold remained sharp. Silas sat in the driver's seat, watching the dog in the rearview mirror. It had stopped trembling under his jacket, but its eyes never left him. It wasn't just seeking warmth. It was waiting for something. He pulled out his phone and snapped a quick picture, sending it to the local animal control office. Maybe someone reported a missing dog. As he waited for a response, his fingers drummed against the steering wheel. He had dealt with plenty of stray cases before, but this one felt different. Too deliberate, too personal. His thoughts were interrupted by movement. The dog slowly sat up, ears perked toward the window, muscles tensed. Silas followed its gaze, out into the dark, rain-slicked streets. First, he saw nothing. Then, a shadow moved near the alley across the road. A figure, watching. Silas's instincts kicked in. He shifted in his seat, trying to get a better look, but the moment his eyes locked onto the figure, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. The dog let out a low, guttural growl, not aggressive but warning. Silas's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Someone was out there. Someone this dog recognized. "All right, buddy?" Silas muttered, reaching for his flashlight. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He cracked the door open, but before he could step out, the dog lunged forward, blocking his path. It didn't bite, didn't snarl, just pressed its body against him, stopping him from leaving. The message was clear. Silas hesitated, glancing back toward the alley. The figure was gone, but something told him this wasn't over. Not even close. Silas sat back in his seat, heart pounding as the dog's weight pressed against his leg. The message was unmistakable: don't go out there. He exhaled slowly, glancing at the alley one last time. Whoever had been watching was gone, but the uneasy feeling in his gut remained. What had this dog gotten itself into? He reached for the police radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Montgomery. Possible suspicious activity near 5th and Lenox. No immediate threat, but requesting a patrol in the area." The response was quick. "Copy that, Montgomery. Unit will sweep the area." But Silas knew the person in the alley wouldn't be found. They had disappeared too fast. Turning his attention back to the dog, he ran a hand through his damp fur, searching for any sign of branding, an old tag, anything that could help. As his fingers moved along the dog's neck, he felt it, raised scars. Not from a fight, but from something wrapped around its skin for too long. Collar, tight one. Someone had marked this dog, and then tried to erase it. The dog shivered under his touch, letting out a deep sigh, and for the first time, it leaned into him. Silas swallowed hard. He had spent years on the force, dealing with criminals, addicts, lost souls. But there was something different about trust. When an animal that had clearly suffered still found the courage to trust again, it meant something. A buzz from his phone broke the silence. Animal control had responded. No missing dog reports matching this German Shepherd. But then, at the bottom of the message, something made Silas's breath hitch. Dog may be connected to a case from 3 years ago. Possible name, Titan. Silas looked at the dog, and suddenly, everything changed. Silas stared at the message on his phone, his grip tightening instinctively around the device. Titan. The name felt oddly familiar, like a whisper from a past he couldn't quite grasp. He turned his gaze to the dog, half expecting a reaction. But Titan, if that was really his name, remained still, his deep brown eyes locked onto Silas with quiet intensity, as if waiting for him to connect the dots. A 3-year-old case. Silas racked his memory, searching through old reports and half-forgotten rumors. Then, it struck him like a sudden jolt of electricity. Titan was a police K-9. Not just any K-9, but the partner of Officer Aaron DeWitt, a cop who had vanished without a trace under circumstances that had never quite made sense. Officially, DeWitt had been labeled AWOL, a cop who walked away from his badge. But those who had worked with him, including Silas, knew that didn't add up. There had been whispers of corruption, of DeWitt getting too close to something dangerous. And then, just like that, he was gone. Along with Titan. Silas swallowed hard, his eyes flicking back to the dog. If this really was the same Titan, then where had he been all this time? And more importantly, why had he come back now? What had happened to him? Slowly, Silas reached out, his fingers brushing against the damp fur at the dog's scruff. "Titan?" he said, his voice careful, testing. Nothing. No reaction, no recognition. The dog didn't flinch, didn't stiffen. But he also didn't respond to the name. That wasn't normal. Police canines were trained to react instantly to their names, their commands, their handlers. But Titan had changed. The radio on Silas's shoulder crackled to life, shattering the heavy silence. Montgomery patrol swept the area. No sign of suspicious activity. "You need backup." Silas hesitated. His thoughts tangled in the storm of new information. He should report this in. He should call animal control, check in with the department, follow protocol. But something deep in his gut, that instinct that had kept him alive on the force for years, told him to hold back, to wait. There was something bigger at play here. His thumb hovered over the radio button. Then finally he pressed it. Negative. No backup needed. "I'll handle it." He turned off the radio and exhaled slowly. Titan had made his choice by jumping into his car. Now it was Silas's turn to make one of his own. The rain had finally eased, but the cold still clung to the air, wrapping around the city like an invisible fog. Silas gripped the steering wheel, his thoughts racing faster than his heartbeat. Titan. The name kept echoing in his mind, bringing with it a storm of unanswered questions. If this was truly the same police K-9 that had vanished with Officer DeWitt 3 years ago, then where had he been all this time? And more importantly, why had he come back now? Titan sat in the back seat, silent, his large frame barely moving. His eyes, though calm, held something beneath the surface. A history he couldn't speak, but one that weighed heavily on him nonetheless. Silas knew that look. He had seen it before in soldiers who had returned from war zones, in victims who had survived tragedies. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and lost even more. Taking a deep breath, Silas reached for his onboard computer. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was he really about to dig into a case that the department had long since buried? The official story was clear. DeWitt had abandoned his post, disappeared without a trace, and Titan had gone with him. No further investigation, no loose ends. Just another cop who had cracked under pressure. But Silas had never quite believed that story. And now, a ghost from that case had quite literally jumped into his car. He hesitated only a second before typing. Case file number 314, Officer Aaron DeWitt, MIA. The screen flickered as old records surfaced. He scanned through the reports, DeWitt's last known location, his patrol route that night, the final radio transmission before he went dark. But it wasn't until Silas scrolled further that something made his stomach drop. A report filed just weeks before DeWitt's disappearance. It was brief, almost dismissive, but the words hit Silas like a punch to the ribs. Officer DeWitt raised concerns about internal misconduct related to ongoing narcotics operations, expressed suspicion that officers within the department were involved. Claims were deemed unsubstantiated. No further action taken. Silas's blood ran cold. Internal misconduct. Corrupt cops. Had DeWitt gotten too close to the truth? And had he paid the price for it? His hand tightened into a fist as he turned to look at Titan again. Suddenly, it all made sense. Titan hadn't just been running from the storm, from hunger, or from the streets. He had been running from something much bigger. And now, for reasons Silas didn't yet understand, he had come to him. The weight of that realization pressed down on Silas's chest. If Titan was the key to what had really happened to DeWitt, then keeping him safe wasn't just the right thing to do. It might be the most dangerous decision Silas had ever made. He turned the key in the ignition. "All right, Titan," he muttered under his breath. "Let's find out what really happened." As the engine roared to life, Titan shifted slightly, his ears twitching. It was almost as if he understood. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The low hum of the engine filled the quiet patrol car as Silas merged onto the nearly deserted road. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still glistened under the streetlights, reflecting ghostly streaks of yellow and red. Titan remained curled in the back seat, his breathing slow but watchful. He was calm but not at ease. It was as if he knew, just as Silas did, that the night had shifted. Something was in motion now, something they couldn't undo. Silas's fingers drummed against the steering wheel as his mind churned through everything he had just uncovered. DeWitt had suspected dirty cops inside their own department. And then, conveniently, he had disappeared. No one had questioned it. No one had pursued it. They had just let it go. But Titan had survived. And if the dog had been out there all this time, had he been hiding? Or had someone been keeping him quiet? A sharp flicker in the rearview mirror snapped Silas from his thoughts. Headlights, 2 cars back, dark-colored sedan, moving too smoothly with his patrol car, keeping pace even as he changed lanes. A coincidence? Maybe. But Silas had been on the force long enough to feel when he was being followed. And this was no accident. His jaw tightened. He tapped the brakes slightly, watching for a reaction. The sedan hesitated for a beat, then mirrored the move. Yeah. They were tailing him. Titan shifted in the back seat, his ears perking up. He had sensed it too. Silas's pulse remained steady, but his mind raced. If someone was following him, it meant 2 things. They knew Titan was with him, and they weren't happy about it. That meant whoever was behind this had been watching. And they were watching right now. Carefully, Silas reached for his radio, keeping his eyes on the road. "Dispatch, this is Montgomery." Requesting. Before he could finish, the radio cut out. Static. Nothing but static. Silas cursed under his breath. They had jammed his frequency. Whoever was in that car wasn't just following him. They were making sure he had no backup. Titan let out a low, guttural growl. Not loud. Not panicked. Warning. Silas exhaled slowly, gripping the wheel tighter. He needed to think fast. He couldn't lead them to the station. If the corruption DeWitt had uncovered was real, then there was a chance the people in that car weren't just random players. They could be cops. His own people. And if that was the case, turning Titan in for safekeeping might be a death sentence for the dog. No, he had to lose them. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Silas turned sharply onto a side street, tires screeching against the wet pavement. The sedan hesitated for a second, then followed. Titan braced himself in the back, his body tense but silent. Silas's heart pounded as he gunned the engine, weaving through empty intersections and dimly lit roads. But the car stayed on him. Whoever they were, they weren't backing off. And that meant only one thing. They didn't just want Titan. They wanted Silas gone too. Silas's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he sped through the slick, empty streets, the dark sedan tailing him like a shadow that refused to be shaken. His pulse remained steady. He had been in chases before, but this wasn't a high-speed pursuit with sirens blaring and backup on the way. This was something else. They weren't trying to pull him over. They weren't trying to intimidate him. They were trying to make sure he didn't make it out of this night. Titan stayed low in the back seat, his large frame tense, ears perked, his breathing controlled but heavy. He knew the danger was real. It was as if some primal instinct had kicked in. He had seen this before. Maybe he had been hunted before. Silas's mind worked fast, calculating his options. If these guys were willing to follow a marked police car, it meant one of 2 things. Either they weren't afraid of being seen, or they had enough power to cover their tracks. And if DeWitt had been killed for getting too close to something within the force, that meant these men weren't just criminals. They were inside. The radio was still dead. No dispatch, no backup, nothing. Whoever these people were, they had planned for this. Silas exhaled sharply and made a sudden left onto a service road, his tires skidding over the wet pavement. The sedan followed immediately. No hesitation. No concern about being discreet. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were moving in. Damn it. Silas scanned his surroundings. He was headed toward an industrial area, mostly abandoned at this hour. Fewer streetlights, fewer witnesses. Bad place to be caught. His mind flashed to Titan. If this was the same K9 that had vanished with DeWitt, then the dog had survived something. He had been running, hiding until tonight, until he had willingly jumped into Silas's car. Had Titan recognized him? Had he chosen Silas for a reason? Or had he simply recognized a cop who wasn't in on it? None of that mattered now. What mattered was getting out of this alive. A flash of movement in the rearview mirror, the sedan was speeding up, closing the distance. Silas made a split-second decision. He jerked the wheel hard to the right, skidding onto an unmarked gravel path leading into an old warehouse lot. The sedan followed, but this time Silas was ready. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching, and the car spun just enough to throw his pursuers off. The sedan overshot the turn. That was all he needed. Silas hit the gas hard, cutting back onto another side road and weaving through the darkened lot. For the first time, he saw the sedan drop further behind. But they wouldn't give up that easily. They would come back. He needed a plan, fast. Silas glanced at Titan through the mirror. The dog stared back, unblinking, waiting. "You've been running long enough," Silas muttered. "Time to find out what you know." And then, for the first time all night, Titan let out a single low bark, as if he understood. The night stretched on like an open wound, the distant hum of the city swallowed by the eerie silence of the empty industrial lot. Silas kept one hand on the wheel, the other hovering near his holster. The sedan had disappeared for now, but he knew better than to believe they had given up. Titan sat rigid in the back seat, his amber eyes locked onto Silas through the mirror. There was something eerily human about his gaze. Not fear, not panic, purpose. Silas pulled into a darkened alley between two abandoned warehouses, cutting the engine. The sound of his own breathing filled the car. For a long moment, he just sat there, fingers tightening and relaxing against the steering wheel. He had crossed a line tonight. There was no turning back now. "All right, Titan," he muttered, twisting in his seat to face the dog. "You showed up for a reason. You know something." Titan didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he shifted forward, placing his massive paw against the console between them. His nails scraped the plastic, and Silas's eyes flickered downward, to the scars on Titan's leg. The hair-thin, jagged lines ran along his skin in a pattern too deliberate to be accidental. A surgical scar? No, this was different. It almost looked like a brand. Silas's stomach twisted. His pulse pounded as he grabbed his flashlight and carefully examined the old marks. Then, realization slammed into him like a freight train. They weren't random scars. They were numbers. A serial number. Titan had been tagged. Silas's breath hitched. Not by DeWitt. Not by the department. By someone else. Someone who wanted to keep track of him. Someone who needed him silenced. And suddenly, everything made sense. Titan hadn't just been a police K-9. He had been evidence. DeWitt must have found something. Something he wasn't supposed to. And Titan? He had seen too much. Maybe even witnessed whatever happened to his handler. And that meant whoever had been hunting them wasn't just trying to cover up DeWitt's disappearance. They were trying to erase every trace of it. Silas sat back, heart hammering. Titan had been running from them for 3 years. Tonight, he had stopped running. He had chosen Silas. And now, because of that choice, Silas was in their crosshairs too. A distant rumble of an approaching engine made his decision for him. They had found him. Titan's ears perked, his body tensing. He knew what was coming. Silas reached for his gun, his voice low but steady. "You ready, boy?" Titan didn't hesitate. He let out a deep, resolute growl. They weren't running anymore. The low rumble of an approaching engine sent a chill down Silas's spine. They had found him. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, the weight of it pressed against his ribs like a vice. There was no way out, no backup, no more running. Titan sat tense in the back seat, his sharp eyes fixed on the alley entrance. He wasn't just watching, he was waiting. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to act. Silas took a deep breath and checked his gun. Fully loaded. Good. He had been in firefights before, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about the truth. The sedan crept into view, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Silas could make out 2 figures inside, one in the driver's seat, the other stepping out. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture too controlled to be some random thug. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Montgomery. The voice was calm, almost casual. Step out of the car. Let's talk. Silas didn't move. Talk? Yeah, right. He had seen enough dirty deals go down to know how this ended. Titan let out a low, guttural growl. The man took a slow step forward. That dog isn't yours, officer. You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Silas clenched his jaw. Funny. I was just about to say the same thing. The man sighed, shaking his head. You don't understand what you've stepped into. You don't want this fight. Silas's grip tightened on his gun. That's the thing. I think I do. The man exhaled sharply. Last chance. Silas didn't give him one. He moved first. With a swift motion, he threw open the driver's side door and fired a warning shot. Just enough to send the man diving for cover. In the same instant, Titan lunged. The dog shot out of the car like a bullet, his powerful body a blur of motion. The second man, who had been stepping out of the sedan, barely had time to react before Titan was on him. A snarl ripped through the alley as the dog's teeth sank into the man's arm, sending him crashing to the ground. Silas didn't hesitate. He moved fast, using the chaos to his advantage. He took cover behind the patrol car and fired another shot, this time hitting the sedan's front tire. No getaway now. The first man cursed loudly, ducking behind the car. You're making a mistake, Montgomery. Silas steadied his aim. So did DeWitt. Didn't he? Silence. That was it. That was the confirmation he needed. Titan growled low, pinning the second man to the ground. The guy wasn't moving. He knew better than to fight a trained K9. Sirens. For the first time that night, the sound of backup filled the air. The man behind the sedan knew it too. He cursed under his breath, tossing his gun aside as the red and blue lights lit up the alleyway. They had lost. Titan finally released his hold, stepping back towards Silas, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Silas knelt beside him, running a hand over the dog's head. You did good, boy. Titan blinked up at him, and for the first time his tail wagged, just once. As the officers swarmed in, Silas exhaled. This wasn't over. The truth about DeWitt was still buried deep. But now he had the key. He looked at Titan, and he wasn't going to stop until they found it together.